So it should come as no surprise that I really fucking hate clickbaity title and articles. So I was surfing through my normal feeds that I usually get, and I came across this SciPost.org posting that was annoying and rather disingenuous.
Oh, you sin? We've got a big case here. Where have you been?
And it reads, Study, Racial Resentment Influences Appraisals of President Trump's Economic Performance. And it says in the little subtitle caption there, a new research published in the Journal of Electoral Studies indicates that racial beliefs can lead some Americans to minimize President Barack Obama's ...
So even you have become rotten.
Well, okay, so I took the bait. I fucking hate clickbaity titles. I was like, well, there might be something to that because, apparently America's a big, giant racist country and postmodern thinking likes to lump everybody together in races anyways. So why not? I mean, clearly they're playing the tribal race baity shit, even though we're trying to move away from that, I guess, by making it more about life, which is fucking stupid and retarded. Let me heal your wounds by cutting it deeper. That sounds like a great recipe for success. But anyways, let me pull up that article for you. So SciPost study racial resentment influences appraisals of Obama's performance. So you scroll down through this article and it says new research leads that racial beliefs can lead some Americans to minimize President Barack Obama's economic accomplishments. And they quote a piece out of there. What interested us the most was the idea that people construct their own racial reality, and they will align their beliefs to fit within this reality. People tend to minimize or ignore information that is inconsistent with their existing racial beliefs, whatever that fucking means, said the study's author, Darren W. Davis, professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame. Many people were not fair in their evaluations of President Obama. What is fair? You think he did well or think he did not do well? I consider us being in debt not well. I don't consider him bailing out banks that are multi-billion-dollar corporations that set themselves up for failure well. I don't consider bailing out the auto industry when they fucking screwed everything up because of shit that he put in his policies well. There's plenty of evidence to say that he didn't do very well. It has nothing to do with his skin and everything to do with the decisions he made. But I digress. Many people were not fair in their evaluations with Barack Obama. If they were highly racial resentful, they were not willing to evaluate President Obama objectively. Instead, individuals align with their beliefs about President Obama to be consistent with their resentment toward African Americans. So because he's black and people resent the crime rates or whatever else, or the attitudes they get from black people, or the racism that white people experience, but apparently only black people can feel racist according to pretty much everything that comes out of a black person's mouth. So, the pot calling kettle, I guess. That must be that there's a racial resentment. So the data was examined from 1,100 white respondents. So they only did white people. That was their demographic, to basically evaluate black resentment. Because Obama's black, therefore we need to ask this racial resentment bit on white people. This would be interesting had this, I'll get to it in a second. The respondents were asked how much credit or blame the president should receive if the economy improved or worsened. So they attributed more blame to Obama for worsening national economy than credit for an improving economy. State governors, on the other hand, were given more credit and less blame. So state legislature, which they could not necessarily determine was white or black, depending on if they did the study at Notre Dame or they did it abroad. Maybe they did an internet study, who knows? At least from this stuff, it doesn't really tell you. What's fun here is the misleading ways that this SciPost.org framed this. But the researchers also found evidence that racial resentment could override partisan belief. Among Democrats and independents, participants who agreed with the statement like African Americans bring up race only when they need to make an excuse for their failures, tended to give Obama less credit or blame for the economy. The average person should take away from our study that people can be held captive by their own political and racial beliefs. We used to think that it's only one party's identification was capable of biasing how people process information, but racial prejudice can be just as strong. This is true, actually. There is such thing as racial prejudice. It is evident in people's behaviors, and the more vocal they are, the more obvious it becomes. There are racists on every race. Every race has the capability of being racist. Not the entire race themselves, but the individuals in that race. What's amazing to me is that anybody listens to anybody that has racial bias or resentment. There's no need for it. There's no use of it. It is a genetic component to determine our ancestry. Nothing more, nothing less. It can show you where somebody might survive better in certain climates than others. But that's it. I mean, it's absolutely useless otherwise. So what's the point? Basically, it goes along and goes along saying that there's because of the drive toward racial cognitive consistency, people construct different racial realities. We consider this to be extremely dangerous because race becomes an interactable problem. There are no agreed upon facts and dialogue. There are no agreed upon facts and dialogue becomes impossible. Man, that read weird for me. This could be true. If you racialize things, well, race becomes a determinant factor based on, it's a genetic component, it is a biological function. So if you're basing a political view on racial identity, there's no way that you can separate the two because you interchange them. Now, I want you to note something in this study, in this appraisal, that was interesting, but they kind of only really touched upon it and didn't really talk about it, and it's right here. But the researchers also found evidence that racial resentment could override partisan beliefs. Among Democrats and independents, participants who agreed with the statement African Americans bring up race only when they need to make an excuse for their failures tend to give Obama less credit and more blame for the economy. That caught my eye in reading this, and I'll tell you why. I'm pretty sure it's the Democratic Party at this point that's barking diversity as a strength, that's barking we need to, what was that chick's
My job is to shut other white people down when they want to interrupt.
Oh, that was stupid. And you're going to regret it.
Yeah, that's the message that the Democrats are sending. Weird that they would think this way based on political lines. So I decided, since at the link at the bottom here is the actual study, to pull up said actual study. So here's the study here, appraisals of President Obama's economic performance, racial resentment, and attribution responsibility. So if you've ever read a study, I'm not going to drag you through the study. Most studies are extremely painful to read through. Unless you're a doctor, then it's all sorts of interesting. As you can see, Electoral Studies, Volume 55, October. It was published October 2018. So it's not out yet. Interesting. Oh, it'll be out in that issue. I guess this one was e-published, and it's going to go out in the paper copy, I guess. Pages 62 to 72. So this thing's 10 pages long. That's a good content, I guess. So they probably, they had multivariate analysis, which is pretty interesting. But if you read through a study, you can go through the abstract and pretty much get the gist of everything that was in there. And if you have any other questions that are driving beyond the abstract, you can read the whole study itself and really get into the meat and potatoes and details. I'm not going to bore you with that. Most people hate that shit anyways. Teal Deer could take this one and roll with it and do some pretty amazing things. I leave that for myself. I don't want other people to suffer through, because I've talked to way too many people and they're like, why do you read this shit? And I'd rather enjoy it, but I'm not gonna punish you for that. So, abstracts. In this research, we show that positive and negative framings of the economy motivated racial resentments and consistent, cognizant judgments among whites about President Obama's responsibility for the economy, using experimental data collected from the 2012 Cooperative Congressional Election Study, which is actually a pretty good study if you have a chance to go through it. It's pretty comprehensive. I'd give it some merit. It's not junk data that you usually see from other fucking retards. Anyways, we find that whites attributed more responsibility to Obama under negative economic conditions, i.e. blame, than positive economic conditions, i.e. credit. Partisanship influenced both patterns, but racial resentment matters only among Democrats and independents, not Republicans. We also compared President Obama's governors and found that whites attributed equal responsibility to the president and governors for the negative economic conditions, but gave more responsibility to the governors than Obama for positive conditions. Whites also gave governors more responsibility for state improvements than they gave Obama for national ones. Our findings highlight that the likely inescapability of racial biases regardless of positive information or shared political identity. So it's saying that most people attribute some sort of racial resentment because they tested racial resentment and they tested political economic policy, I guess you could say. And what's interesting here, racial resentment matters only among Democrats and independents, not Republicans. So racial resentment does not matter to Republicans. But Republicans are supposed to be the party of racists. So if the party of racists has no resentment or does not have racial resentment, doesn't matter to them. But it does to Democrats, and then they also contribute, as you saw in the paper itself, that they contribute heavy negativity and bias, saying that, the whites or blacks only use the race card to call out their failures. Doesn't that make the Democratic Party a party of racists at that point? I mean, seriously, you got data that conclusively says that Democrats and independents, racial resentment matters, not Republicans. And there's probably some mean score in there, like some wiggle room, but in general data, that's what it means. Then you got the thing that you saw in the original statement, that they have a question about the people pull the race card only to hide their failures. And it's the Democrats and independents that think that, not Republicans. What the fuck? I happen to be a Democrat still. I'm going to release a different video probably today, maybe later this week about that, but what? I thought the Democrats and the independents were all about equality of the races and not being racist, and everybody else in the Republican Party clearly is racist. What's happening here if that's the case? Clearly, some news outlets are telling a little lie. A big one. Not just a little one. Anyways, that's all I got for this one. I thought you'd enjoy this. I found this quite interesting because here's a demonstration of racism, essentially, where you're saying that black people are being racist, and they're the only ones really doing it. That's not necessarily true. And it's actually racial resentment, not necessarily racism, so it's kind of a form of bigotry, I guess you could say. They're not necessarily saying that blacks are better or worse or for anything of that sort, but they are saying that they only pull the race card when they want to get out of shit. And saying that, plus the economic conditions, and comparing it to political policy, because now you're talking about politics when it comes to the policy he put forth, and comparing it to the attitudes or visualizations of resentment toward races in particular. And it's only whites that did this study, so you're talking to a bunch of whites that are independent, Democratic, and Republican. Apparently Democratic whites are pretty fucking racist. And probably Democratic independents as well, because they're the only ones that gave a shit and would say something like that. And the Republicans are like, no, that doesn't happen. They only pull the race card when they're trying to get out of stuff. Not really. They probably have a reason to pull the race card. I tend to actually agree with the Democrats at this point from the shit I've seen. They're talking about it being a race war all the goddamn time, and I mean, salon people are racist because the chick didn't want to pay $5. Cops are racist because guy runs away, shoots at him, and gets shot in the back simultaneously. Yeah, sure. Anyways, I thought you'd enjoy this one. I came across my feed a while ago, and I intended to make a video, but it's never quiet in my house, so this happened to be a perfect time to do it. I hope you enjoyed this one. Keeping it kind of short and sweet, sort of, 15 minutes. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.
Your kung fu is good, but you are too emotional.